Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey. Glad to welcome Jeff Rasley, a former attorney who is both an author and a public speaker. Jeff will be speaking to us today from Indianapolis, Indiana. Jeff has many gifts. He is a BA from the University of Chicago, magna cum laude, a Phi Beta Kappa, and an all academic, all state football letter winner in swimming and football. He earned his JD from Indiana University Law School cum laude and has been admitted to the Indiana U.S. District and U.S. Supreme Court bars. And Jeff could also be a poster child for Rebirth. He built a successful career in law and business and was a millionaire by the time he was 40. And he was also a very involved husband and father to his 2 children. Life was great, and the sports car and the Harley were fun. But in his mid-40s, Jeff began to manifest midlife symptoms. He seemed to need something beyond family, life, career, and financial good fortune. His wife's answer to, "Is that all there is?" was to suggest that Jeff go trekking in the Himalayas and reconnect with his adventurous and more spiritual side that he had lost in the pursuit of success. That trek transformed Jeff's life. I'm looking forward to talking with Jeff about the ways his pursuit of success transformed into a more spiritual and meditative approach to life, his travel experiences from a spiritual perspective, what Jeff calls his philanthro treks, the creation of the Bassa Village Foundation, and 2 of his 11 books titled You Have to Get Lost Before You Can Be Found, a memoir of suffering, grit, and love of the Himalayas and Bassa Village, and Island Adventures, Disconnecting in the Caribbean and South Pacific. This is sure to be a fascinating and inspiring story of healing and rebirth. Hi, Jeff. A warm welcome to Grief and Rebirth Podcast.
Hello. Namaste, Irene.
Namaste to you too. This is going to be a pleasure. We're going to have a great time. You're such an interesting guy. Let's start by letting everyone know who you were before all these transitions took place in your life. So in your early years, you were an avid adventure traveler. And please also describe your spiritual side when you were growing up and share what drew you to business and law as a career.
Well, I grew up in a small town in northern Indiana, Goshen, Indiana, which is not so small anymore. But when I was growing up, there were about 10,000 people in the city, and it was small enough that most everybody knew each other. And my family had been there for 5 generations, an early pioneer family. So we really knew everybody in the community. And like most of my friends, I grew up in a church, happened to be the Presbyterian church, and sitting in the family pew with 4 generations, because
Wow.
my great-grandmother lived to be 98. It had a very, I think, powerful, influential impact in terms of integrating into my value system the sort of, the golden rule that, at least at my church, Christianity promoted of, loving your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you have them do unto you. And so, although eventually the sort of the dogma and theology of the church I left behind, I think that value system stayed with me. And so by the time I was a senior in high school, I was helping to organize the first Walk for Hunger in Goshen. And, that was kind of, I guess I would say, my first really major effort at philanthropy, which means love of humanity. And so, that was kind of the springboard to many other philanthropic projects that I've been involved with over time.
And what drew you to business and law as a career? Since you liked adventure travel too, didn't you? Like, were you doing that?
Yeah, yeah. I dropped out of college after one semester and hitchhiked across the country,
Now,
which
wait, I have to ask you, how'd your family feel about that one?
well, my mom drove me to the edge of town, and I think she had tears in her eyes as she saw me standing by State Road 15 on the south side of Goshen with my backpack and my thumb out. But she also knew that I was the sort of kid that was not to be stopped once I had set my mind on something. And so not very happy about it, but you know, uh, I wanted to get out of our small town and see the world, and I thought the most interesting way to do it would be to hitchhike. So that's what I did.
It's wonderful that she let you go that way. That was a lot of parents wouldn't do that. I think that was great. And as you were growing up, so we understand your commitment to social activism and philanthropy when you're in high school, and it carried through in college. And what got you to choose business and law?
Well, my, I think my parents would say it was because I always enjoyed arguing. Um, so I mean, really, from an early age, there was an expectation that I would become a lawyer. Um, I like debate. I like public speaking. I like theater. I had the lead in our junior class play, and then as a freshman in college, I had the lead in another play, and so I was kind of drawn to performance, and so I thought being a trial lawyer would be really cool and would be something that I could like do that sort of performative, argumentative um, aspect of my personality that I enjoyed, but at the same time could represent people that needed help. So
Yeah, you were getting in talking about you were acting in high school and all. You were also helping other people in their family dramas and their life dramas, weren't you? Again,
yeah, yeah, and yeah. So, but when I started out, when I first graduated from law school, I went to work for a legal services organization, which is a poverty law and social justice nonprofit organization. And, that's really sort of was how I wanted to create a legal career initially, do that kind of work. But after a few years, um, I went to the dark side and left left legal services organization and joined as a young associate a large corporate firm in downtown Indianapolis and sort of learned the business side of law there, but woke up most mornings feeling almost sick to my stomach. I mean, literally nauseous about going into the office because it was just such a toxic environment where people were constantly writing what we called CYA, cover your ass memos. And it was all about making money for the firm and not getting into trouble. And it was just this very sort of constricted, icky approach to being a lawyer. So with
actually,
two,
to life in a way, because a lot of that's still going on to this day.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So two of my best friends left the firm, started their own firm, and I joined them after they had kind of got the little firm established and going. And the three of us had a delightful time trying to create a business, but also to try to do it in a more virtuous way where we, put the clients first and making money second, mainly because we were just desperate to get any clients. But it succeeded. And after a while, my two partners left to join another kind of middle-sized firm that wanted to become a big firm, and I just did not want to go through that again. And so went through a series of joining with other friends, and eventually was the senior partner in a small firm that was successful. And so, as you described, I hit 40 and had sort of this midlife crisis of having concentrated for so many years on building this business, the law firm, but also building a family because 2 kids had come along, and the adventuresome side of my personality had really been ignored for too long, and was screaming to get out, which my wife recognized in the symptoms of a midlife crisis. So I came home from the office one day, and she slapped down on the dining room table in front of me a brochure about trekking the Mount Everest Base Camp Trail, and said, "Why don't you go do this?"
Wow, what a good woman you have there.
Yeah.
You really do. She really cared about you, and she also was very okay with letting you go to do what you needed to do, like your mom had let you go. That was like wonderful that she did that. And I'll hold down the fort. You go figure it out. That's terrific. What and who inspired you to return to this Himalayan region 14 times after that first trek? And what about you changed when you adopted that more spiritual and meditative approach to life? Tell us about that first trip and how it changed you.
Well, the way it changed me is to experience this very different culture in Nepal, and to see the most magnificent mountains in the world. So there's this kind of twofold pull. I was really impressed and moved by how Sir Edmund Hillary described the Sherpa people, and really all the different tribal ethnic groups that live up in the high Himalayas, as the kindest and strongest people in the world. And I found that to be absolutely true. The people living in these small villages and as solitary yak herders were just amazingly strong, tough, but also had a wonderful, welcoming attitude towards strangers.
Wow.
And so, live in their traditional cultures, live by the ethic of a stranger is a welcome guest in their village. And I found this really attractive. And so I wanted to go back. And I also wanted to become a climber, a mountaineer, not just a trekker. I thought it would be, more exciting and adventuresome to get up and actually climb those big peaks rather than
Courageous
just
fellow,
hike
aren't you?
around. Yeah.
Courageous guy.
Well, and in Indiana, there's not exactly a lot of mountains to climb. So that was just, that was one of several different kind of adventure travel methods that I've experimented with. But so I took some courses on climbing, and went back and started, joining my mountaineering groups, and did a number of mountain climbs, and over time eventually was leading treks and climbing expeditions, and then eventually developed this foundation, the Bassa Village Foundation, to try to give back to these wonderful, kind, and strong people that had become my friends.
Now, but would you say this is what constituted your more spiritual and meditative approach to life? I mean, did you just completely quit working, and you adopted this whole new attitude? You were out of the rat race?
Well, no, it took a while because the first time I went to Nepal was in 1995, and I continued practicing law until 2010. So for quite a while there, I was going off to Nepal about every other year for a while, um, and just leaving home and practice behind for about 3 to 4 weeks. Um, but as I was doing that, I started writing articles about it, and because as as you mentioned, kind of this spiritual awakening or reawakening that I was having was because these people that I was spending time with over there and getting to know um, had just a much more grounded approach to life than most Americans, at least the Americans living in the kind of executive professional class that was my social milieu back in
So
Indianapolis.
can you kind of describe what you would call a grounded way of life?
Yeah. So the people that eventually I became the closest to are called the Rai people, and they live in the Himalayas just below where the Sherpas live. And there's a lot of interaction between those two ethnic tribal groups. But the Sherpas are Buddhists. The Rai people are what we would call animists, that they don't have a formal religion. They have an approach to life. They think there is spirit or soul in everything, not just living things, but even in rocks and mountains, and so they have this really deep respect to the natural for the natural world, and with respect to the natural world, because it has spirit or soul just like living things do. And so there's this sort of super environmentalist attitude of care for nature, but that extends towards other people. And so the ethic that I grew up with, love your neighbor as yourself, I was experiencing people actually living that, which most Christians do not. I mean, we don't. We in big cities, we're afraid of other people. We keep our
Right,
doors
right.
locked. We keep our car doors locked. We go around, many people carrying guns for protection, and so there's this very guardedness. Whereas there, with these people, the Rai, the Sherpas, they don't lock their doors. Some houses don't even have doors. There's just this very sense of welcoming and openness, and so that was part of it. And then the other part of it was just kind of a reacquainting with very simple things in life. When you're trekking or climbing, what you're focusing on is the natural world around you and taking the next step, as opposed, so having this very sort of simple, grounded way of living for a period of time, as opposed to having 150 law cases that my mind is constantly whirling around, making sure I don't miss a deadline, trying to accomplish the goals my clients have for me. And so is this very interesting contrast there for quite a few years, and eventually, because I was thankfully financially successful, I finally, when my kids were off to college, I let go of practicing law.
You were able to follow your heart and soul to do what you needed to do. So tell us about these philanthrop treks. Do you go with groups of people? And they combine visiting Nepal with culturally sensitive development work, and it led to the creation of Basa Village Foundation. So could you tell us about that part of your journey?
Yeah, when after I'd been there, and Nepal is the poorest country outside of Africa. There's a handful of countries in Africa that, have a lower standard of living and lower life expectancy and sort of all the measurable ways that you define poverty. Nepal is near the very bottom
Wow.
of that list. So, and the people that go over on treks or mountaineering experience almost always leave feeling this desire to give back, because they had this wonderful experience of these wonderful, open, friendly people that you just come away wanting to give back. So the first few times I went back, I would do little fundraisers, mostly through my church at the time, and I would raise a couple $1,000s, buy school supplies, take clothes and stuff like that, and then give some money to a charitable foundation that I had connected with over there. But eventually I decided that I wanted to start my own, and not just be giving money to other people, depending on them. And so out of beginning to lead treks and expeditions, I developed this network of like-minded people. And so we decided that we would start the Basa Foundation, because I had connected with this one little village through the trekking company that I was employing. And the owner of the trekking company, whose name is Niru Rai, had grown up in Basa village. And when he was 14, he left home, hired on as a porter with a trekking company, and eventually moved up through the ranks and then started his own trekking company, called Adventure Geotreks. But he kept hiring as porters and guides and cooks people from his home village of Basa. And so I spent weeks with these people from Basa as my porters and guides and cooks, and got to be very close with them. And we got back to Kathmandu after the first expedition I had done with Adventure Geotreks, and Niru and our chief guide, whose name was Ganesh Rai, that's all of the right people, their last name is Rai. They told me that in their village, Basa, was a school that had 3 grades, and they really wanted to add a 4th and a 5th grade, and hire a 4th and a 5th grade teacher. And would I consider raising $5,000, which would pay to add the 2 classrooms and would pay 2 teachers' salaries for 3 years? And I thought, $5,000 to give, 2 more grades of education to the village kids, of course. So I did, and that was in 2006. So in 2007, raised the money and then organized a trekking group to go visit Basa, which was the first time I was in Basa, and saw the school and met all the villagers who were waiting for us and literally covered us in flowers when we arrived at the village. And it was such a wonderful, inspiring experience. I wrote the first book that I've written about adventures in Nepal, and how I sort of transitioned from a lawyer to an adventure mountain climber to philanthropist with the Basa Foundation.
It's very inspiring. And you've written 11 books. You've been busy. I want to ask you about one of your books, your 9th one. It's titled Island Adventures, Disconnecting in the Caribbean and South Pacific. It's an anthology of adventures on islands across the world. Please share some of the spiritual awakenings and adventures you've personally experienced, And describe how you became lost and alone in a kayak at sea at night, and explain what sustained you during that frightening time. I wouldn't have been such a good candidate for that experience, I can tell you right now. Tell us about that. That's amazing.
Well, in 2000, SARS struck, and people were not traveling to Nepal. We were, told not to go to Southeast Asian countries. So I took a break from going to Nepal. Plus, in 1999, I had a very difficult experience there because 3 people died on our way out from a climbing expedition.
Oh my.
And so instead of doing mountaineering, I did solo sea kayaking adventures. And I was in a little island nation called Palau. And I was kayaking from island to island, and I got lost because in Palau, there's this area called the Rock Islands, and there are literally thousands of little tiny islands. And as it was getting dark, I had not calculated correctly how long it would take to get to the next island where I could set up a campsite, because you can't camp on these little tiny rock islands. And because it was dark and there were all these little islands, I got confused in my navigating, and I missed the island where I had planned to be able to camp that night. I mean, I
Nice.
had a map, and so I thought I knew where I was going. But anyway,
So you didn't realize you had missed it yet.
no. And so I kept paddling and paddling, and I thought, this is taking way too long. I should have been there by really right before sundown, and now sun's down, it's getting darker and darker. And eventually I see this white spot up on, because I'm going along this island, this big island, but it has a sheer cliff and then a mangrove jungle. And so there's no way that I can even pull my kayak up, let alone try to camp. But I see this white spot in the distance on the side of the island. So I paddle and I get there, and it's a half sunken boat, and there's a little spit of sand by it. And so I think maybe I could camp here, but I calculate, because I have a tide chart, and I calculate how much space there is. And I realize that by the time the tide is all the way in and is starting to come in, that little sand spit would be underwater. And so I thought about tying the kayak to one of the mangrove trees and just trying to ride it out. Decided that would be too dangerous, fall asleep, get tipped over by a wave. So I decide I must have just missed the turn and I need to paddle back, but I have now been paddling for 10 hours.
Oh my God, you must have been exhausted.
Well, yeah, I was exhausted, and I thought by what my best calculation was, it was going to be 2 more hours to paddle back to retrace my steps to get back to where I missed the turn. And I thought, this is really just not possible. I just don't have the stamina to do that. But on the other hand, what choice do I have? So I push the kayak back in the water, jump in, start paddling, and within just a few minutes, I'm back out in the open sea, and some very large creature starts bumping the bottom of my
Oh my
kayak.
God.
And there's a lot of sharks in this area, so I figured this is probably a shark, and this is not a good thing. And I can barely see the side of the island, but I've got to paddle, keeping the side of the island within sight, but not getting too far out. And there's a
You're going to be
reef.
someone's dinner.
Yeah. And I have to avoid the reef. So it's really pretty dicey paddling. And all of a sudden, I just had this moment of utter relaxation. And I just knew that I had the strength that I needed to keep paddling. And I had started chanting, and I was chanting out loud the mantra that is very popular in Nepal, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is a Buddhist chant.
Right.
But I intermixed with it different Christian hymns that I grew up
Whoever was
with.
listening, you would like some help, please.
Yeah, and so I'm chanting and singing this mixture of Buddhist mantras and Christian hymns, and something happened, and so I paddled on. I felt as if I had just gotten up. I didn't feel tired at all,
Wow.
and as I rounded this point where the island forms like a V like this, and so I was out here and I came around, and as I came in, and the campsite is down here. As I came around that finger, the sky had been completely black. It was completely covered in clouds. I knew there was a full moon, but you couldn't even see it because the clouds were so thick. As I rounded that point, clouds opened up, full moon came out, lit up this bay, and the water was just this beautiful green lit up by the moon, and the mangrove jungle on both sides, and it just made this beautiful, peaceful, because out in the open side of the island, it was very wavy and current, and then I came here and the bay was perfectly glassy, placid. And so then I paddled for another 20 minutes or so around through down that bay, uh, and found the dock where I was going to camp. And that opening up, it was like that curtain was drawn from this very dangerous place to this utterly peaceful, hopeful place. And so I set my tent up on the dock. And the last bit of the story is during the night, a blizzard
Oh
blew
my
up,
gosh.
and having gone through the, feeling like I might die, to this is just this wonderful, beautiful spiritual experience, to I'm now lying on the tent, spread eagle, with my hands and my feet holding the tent down so that it
My
won't be blown off into the water, lashed with rain. And then the storm passed, and in the morning, the sun was out, and it was a beautiful time to take my clothes off and jump in the ocean and skinny dip because
wow.
nobody else was around.
Wow. What an adventure. And what a reason to be grateful for being alive.
Yeah, so
Definitely
that's
felt
sort
like
of the
sounds
heart
like
of that
a little
that
bit of an
island adventures
intercession.
book.
Yeah. Wow. And then in your 10th book, which is titled You Have to Get Lost Before You Can Be Found, a memoir of suffering, grit, and love of the Himalayas and Bassa village, you also had some harrowing adventures. So could you share a few of them with us and explain what inspired you um, during that cultural? Well, I guess we've talked about what's inspired you to transition from an adventurer to a committed philanthropist during that time. But would you like to share some of your adventures?
Yeah, the one that was really the most moving happened in 1999, which was, just before I had that kayaking adventure. I was with a mountaineering group, and I was not the leader of this group. Um, my friend Tom Proctor was the leader, along with our Sirdar, which means your chief mountain guide, Seth. And so we had trekked, had a very difficult trek because the weather was absolutely terrible. It was a combination of rain and snow every day. But we got to the mountain called Mira Peak, and we got high up on the mountain, but nobody in our group, nobody in any of the other groups could summit because the weather was so terrible, just blizzard up on the mountain. And the snow had built really, really deep. And so finally we just, we gave up and we're hiking out. And the trail out from base camp, the snow had built up hip deep. And I'm 6 foot tall, and so hip deep on me is pretty deep snow. And for the Nepali guys, who are mostly about 5'4", it's waist deep. And so we're, struggling through this snow, this deep snow, and we get to this high mountain pass called the Zatra La, which is a very steep, difficult pass to hike up and over. And it's sort of the most difficult high pass between Mira Peak and Lukla village, which is where you go to fly in and out of the high country. And so we're at the Zatra La, and there we look up and we see 3 Nepali porters who are up on this higher point in the mountain where there's a shortcut trail. And they had taken the shortcut, which is more dangerous, because they were trying to get back to Lukla before their clients were, so that they'd have all their gear there waiting for them. And there had been avalanches all the time that we were up in the mountains. And so this was about week number 3 that we'd been out there. And we hear the roar of an avalanche, and Seth yells, run, just run. So our group, which was 4 climbers plus Seth, because our crew of porters and were behind us. And so we start running down the Zatra La, which is a boulder field, and, banging our shins on boulders, but just running
for your
our
lives,
lives.
literally.
Yeah. But we get down to the bottom and we're fine. The avalanche had petered out, and we just got kind of covered with what's called spin drift, just sort of the remains of the avalanche after it's blown out. And we look up, and the 3 Nepali porters are gone.
Uh-oh.
And we learned later, I mean, we were worried about them, but we learned later they were killed. And the rest of our guys were cut off because the avalanche, they weren't hurt, but they were trapped. And so Seth told us to hike on because Tom knew the way back to Lukla village. And so we hiked on, and Seth went back and made his way back up the Zatra La, ended up having to carry one of the porters down because he did get hurt. And there were 3 rivers you have to cross from Zatra La to Lukla. And as we crossed them, they were getting higher and higher. But by the time Seth and the rest of the crew behind us got there, the rivers had gotten neck high and they couldn't get across. They actually crossed the first 2 and were completely soaked. But the third one, they had to just camp out on the riverbank. And by then we were back in Lukla in a
Probably
lodge.
very worried about all of them.
Very worried. We were staying up all night, waiting, hoping to see them come in, and they didn't. So we started hiking back the next morning to see if we could find them. And then we heard Seth whistling, and he's coming down the trail helping one of the porters who had hurt his leg, carrying his big backpack, Seth's backpack in the front, the porter's doko basket on his back. And he had climbed up and down the Zatra La 3 more times to bring all the stuff down, and then had been, all of them, soaking wet, sleeping out that night, freezing. And he came in whistling
That's
because
amazing.
that's just all in a day's work to him.
Wow. Wow. What truly beautiful people. Wow. Um, so one minute you were in a tent in the Himalayas and going through all this, and then not long after in a car in the middle of Indianapolis. That must have been a real culture shock for you. So would you like to articulate what it meant for you to fly across the world to find these beautiful people and a greater clarity of purpose than what you had? What did that do? I mean, it changed your life.
Well, yeah, I mean, it redirected it in a way because wanting to create a foundation to really give back to these people, and in particular, the Rai people of Bassa Village, who I'd become so close to, I, started spending more and more time doing that foundation work and less time practicing law. And thankfully, I had a younger partner who had a buyout agreement in the partnership that we eventually executed. And so relieved me of the burdens of law practice so I could devote more time to the foundation and to writing.
It matters your
Um,
heart and soul.
yeah, and over the years, I've been on probably 12 different nonprofit boards, and I'm currently on 5 or 6 also. So I, try to do other things here locally um, to help my own local community as well as the community of Bassa.
That's fantastic. Do people in your local community ever go philanthropy trekking with you? I know
Yeah,
you recommend it as a way to deal with a midlife crisis. Has your passion for that caught on to others?
yeah. In Indianapolis, the first time I went trekking, there were 2 people in the entire state of Indiana that were members of the American Mountaineering Association, which was Tom, my buddy, uh, who was in Terre Haute, and me. And since then, there's probably at least 60 or more people here in the Indianapolis area that have gone to Nepal either with me or in other groups that I've helped organize. And, others in the Midwest, there's a group from California, Seattle, uh, Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area, because, I mean, how networks work. I mean, you know that very well, that once somebody else, kind of enters your network, then they bring their network into it. And so there's now 2 other members of our Bassa Foundation that are regularly leading treks, although, everything came to a stop because of COVID, and Nepal is still suffering badly from COVID.
Wow.
So, we're not sending people over. And hopefully this coming year we can start up again, but it's now been almost 3 years.
Right. And now with all the suffering, they need you more than ever, I'm sure.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the foundation during COVID, we managed to finish a project we have to bring a medical clinic to the area. And we just, a couple weeks ago, finished creating a playground for the school, which,
That
because there's a 500-foot drop off right beside the school. Eventually, the teachers and local people thought it would be nice to build a wall so they would quit
sounds
losing
like
the
a good
soccer
idea.
balls we send over there.
Sounds like a very good idea. Now, am I right? That and then they added those other 2 grades.
Yes, they did
Then
that
you had
back.
even more kids using that playground.
Yeah, yep, yeah. So there's about 200 kids in the school, and grades 1 through 5. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So now that everyone knows what interesting, exciting books you write and what a fascinating life you've led, how can members of our Grief and Rebirth podcast audience connect with you and purchase all those wonderful books of yours?
Well, thanks, Irene, to let me give a marketing plug here.
Please, that's what
Um,
this is exactly what this is about. So go for it.
I have a website, which is my full name, jeffreyrasley.com. And
Rasley, right? Rasley.
correct. And or if you just Google my name, you'll find it. And I have an author site on Amazon, which lists all of my books. I'm actually just last week published number 13.
Oh, wow.
So since we first connected, and this year has been my most prolific year, I think because of the pandemic, I've managed to get out 2 books in 1 year.
Would you like to tell us something about them?
Yeah, the second to last one is called America's Existential Crisis, Our Inherited Obligation to the Native Nations. And it was inspired by my visit to Wounded Knee in the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I was shocked to see the level of poverty there, which in some ways is even worse than in Nepal, because it's in contrast to the wealth
To
of
the opulence.
America
That's right. Yes.
around it. And anyway, so that inspired this book, and it starts out with the story of 2 of my ancestors. One was an Indian fighter who was at the massacre of Wounded Knee. He was a lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry. And my other ancestor was given a beautiful beaded vest by the Potawatomi of northern Indiana because he was such a good friend and helped them through avoid starvation during one very hard winter.
Mhm. Now,
And
how
so
did
there
you
are
know
these.
about these 2 ancestors? I have to ask that.
I learned about them. The one that received the beaded vest, I knew just through growing up. He was the father of my great grandmother. So, there were 5 generations there that I was aware of. The other one I learned about when my mom was invited to West Point to attend the 100th anniversary of his graduation class. And
Wow.
we really didn't know much about him. He died young. He died from a wound that he received the day after the Wounded Knee massacre. And so she learned about him, wrote an article about him. And so I used, and then his military records were available. And so I used his account of what happened at Wounded Knee and contrast it with other accounts and try to tell both sides of the 7th Cavalry and the Sioux Indian side of that story. And then I contrast his life with the life of my other ancestor, who was such a good friend to the Potawatomi. And then that takes me into sort of the history of the very fraught relations between the United States of America and particularly the Sioux Nation, but some of the other Indian nations, and I actually sort of anticipated this, big controversy that's now hit the media recently about the Indian schools, the boarding schools, because I have a chapter on that too.
Hmm.
And then the last book, which was just published December 1st, is a very different book. It's called A Pickleball Soap Opera, Love, Murder, and Pickleball.
Okay. So tell us about pickleball.
Well, pickleball has sustained me through the pandemic. I've become a regular pickleball player because we've been able to do that. That's been my athletic outlet during the pandemic, and I just decided to write a sort of crazy fictional novel about a pickleball group that gets embroiled in an international conspiracy involving CIA spies and Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and how this group of pickleball players.
No, please describe what's a pickleball. Like there's a basketball, there's a soccer ball, there's a baseball. What's a pickleball?
Well, the ball itself is actually it's a wiffle ball,
Oh, okay.
and you play with paddles, which are sort of enlarged ping pong paddles on a downsized tennis court.
Okay.
And it's, believe it or not, it's America's fastest growing sport.
Oh, I have to tell my grandsons about that. I have to ask them about that. Well, that's really interesting. And, we've been talking about healing and we've been talking about rebirth and all that. And you so believe in giving to others. Would you like to talk about the ways that giving to others help us to begin to heal, and anything else you'd like to say about the importance for people to heal in their lives?
Yeah, although I mean, I'm intimidated isn't the right word, but I mean, you have, I mean, you're a goddess in that respect. So I am a mere mortal compared to you.
Oh,
Uh,
please.
but there's a lot of psychological research that proves that people feel better about themselves when they give. And I think anybody that's been involved in either, serving charities or even just, giving to your neighbors, there's this sense of fulfillment and a positive self-identification. You think of yourself as a better person when you do good deeds. And so I think, that's part of it, that we heal ourselves in the sense of having a more positive image of ourselves and just feeling better through philanthropy. But the other piece of it is regardless of self, it is for the rest of humanity and nature. I mean, at this point, we need to be concerned as much, if not more, about the natural world than we do about our own species. We can't have one without the other.
And we're not treating it either very well.
Right, exactly. So there's the sort of, in a way, almost a selfish aspect to it. It serves us to serve others, but there's also just, we need to take care of our world, and the natural world is in the most desperate straits it's been since Homo sapiens have been roaming it.
It makes a lot of sense when you talk about the indigenous peoples and all, about how they took such good care of the natural world, and then along came civilization, should I say, that was not too civilized.
Well, certainly industrialization. And, it's like we've got a tiger by the tail, because industrialization gives us so much. I mean, our quality of life in terms of the material aspect of life is so much better. On the other hand, the cost to air, water, ground is getting to the point where, is the cost worth it? We have to find a new balance.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jeff. And what is the Jeff tip for finding joy in life?
For finding joy in life? Yeah, well, I really think we've pretty well covered it. I mean, I think, just that, yeah, giving of yourself to others, but also maintaining that, or not forgetting that childish, adventuresome, curious aspect to our personalities, and feeding that at least a little bit.
That's beautiful. Well, Jeff, helping to uplift others less fortunate than you inspired you to find rebirth and live a more meaningful life. I'm really happy for you and for all of the people your life has touched. Thank you from my heart for this fascinating and uplifting interview, and for your soul-stirring books that help your readers to consider how they can insert more meaning into their lives, helping them to find deeper joy. And here's a reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com And make sure to follow us and like us on social at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. As I like to say, to be continued. Many blessings, and bye for now.